le fait que la vie n'ait pas de sens, justement, nous donne la possibilité de lui donner un sens. C'est justement parce qu'elle n'en a pas, écrit d'avance, tout écrit d'avance, que, autrement dit, qu'on est justifié par rien à l'avance. Il dit toujours, nous sommes contingents, nous sommes nés par hasard, notre existence n'obéit à aucune raison. C'est à nous de lui trouver des raisons, en quelque sorte, de lui donner un sens.
When war broke out, Sartre was conscripted into the army and assigned to a meteorological unit, charting wind conditions to direct artillery fire. Operating well away from the front line, he found that he had a surprising amount of free time on his hands.
Sartre didn't have a lot of guard duty, and he would send balloons up in the air, in my opinion, a very philosophical gesture, and wait to see which way they drifted. And he had what he did not possess in unlimited quantities when he was a teacher, that is time. And there he could reflect on himself and also reflect on the world.
In this somewhat unreal situation, Sartre thought and wrote intensively. He worked on a fictional trilogy, The Roads to Freedom, and began the major philosophical work of his life, Being and Nothingness. It was heavily influenced by the German philosopher Martin Heidegger, who by a strange coincidence had worked as a meteorologist in the First World War.
Peter and Keller went off to get hydrogen. It was their turn. I reread Heidegger's lecture, What is Metaphysics? I spent the day staking out a position vis-à-vis his. The philosophy I'm writing is personal. It plays a role in my life, protecting me against the melancholy, gloom and sadness of war. Philosophy and life have really become one.
When France fell, Sartre was captured and imprisoned. His year as a prisoner of war made him question for the first time the extreme individualism of his thinking.
Là, il fait l'expérience, qui est tout à fait étonnante, visiblement pour lui, d'une rencontre avec des gens qui sont jetés là, par la guerre, abandonnés dans un coin, dans un stalag, dans un camp de prisonniers, mais qui viennent de tout horizon. Là, il fait une expérience humaine qui est décisive, qui lui fait prendre conscience de la nécessité de raccorder, de faire un lien entre la liberté individuelle et le groupe, le social.
When Sartre escaped from the prison camp and returned to occupied Paris, he was determined to take part in some kind of resistance. He would have liked to become a man of action. Instead, he threw himself into the most powerful subversive activity he could engage in, his writing.
Il est rentré, c'était en mars 41. Et le changement, je ne reconnaissais pas. Il était d'une moralité. J'étais sérieux. Ça a changé après, heureusement. Mais il parle de morale. Jamais je n'avais entendu parler de ça.
Sartre worked simultaneously on a political play, the novels, and his philosophical writings. He wrote fast. His ideas had been well prepared during his imprisonment. His play, The Flies, a reworking of Greek myth and staged in 1942, was a thinly disguised attack on the collaborationist Vichy government for preaching guilt and submissiveness to the downcast French.
Once freedom explodes in the human soul, God can do nothing against man. God can do nothing against this pillar of granite, against this irresistible column, man's freedom.
In an explosion of work, Sartre completed Being and Nothingness in the next year. It was a brilliantly original synthesis of ideas from Heidegger, which became the core of existentialism. At its heart was the concept of authenticity, the idea that individuals can always choose their own actions, even in situations that appear to enslave them.
On avait encore ce choix, même dans la situation la plus dramatique, plus que dramatique, la plus tragique. Il y a toujours la possibilité ou de baisser les bras, ou de se laisser aller, ou au contraire peut-être de mourir debout. Il y a toujours une part de choix. même face à l'inéluctable, dans la façon de mourir, par exemple. Sartre était convaincu de ça.
Mathieu was still firing when the roof fell on top of him. He dropped his rifle and fell. 15 minutes, he thought in a fury. I'd give anything just to hold on for 15 minutes. Christ, he said aloud, no one shall say we didn't hold out 15 minutes. He fired. He was cleansed. He was all-powerful. He was free.
Here is the news, read by Richard Wessel. Paris has been liberated. A communique just received from General Koenig announces that it has been liberated by French forces of the interior.
We didn't want to see the French, you see, because the French, they came by the south. We wanted to see the English and the Americans, and they came along the Seine, so we went Place de la Concorde. And it was wonderful, really wonderful, to see them, to see the tanks, and we hated tanks and we hated guns, but to see them coming along the Seine and saying hello, only hello, you see, hearing that language that wasn't French anymore. It was beautiful. Everything was going to change. We were young, we were hopeful, we were hungry and ambitious. Geography wasn't the same, history wasn't the same, French wasn't the same, philosophy wasn't the same. The school had to be completely changed. It could be changed because we had learned our lesson. So Sartre became our chief. He didn't want to. He just wrote because he thought it was true.
With the liberation came freedom of the press, and Sartre set about using it to build a new society.
Sartre ne dit pas « il faut s'engager ». Soyez engagés. Il dit « vous êtes engagés, même quand vous ne le savez pas ». Vous avez des positions sociales, vous ne la connaissez pas. Vous ne vous en rendez pas compte. Donc, sa morale à lui, c'était « prenez conscience de votre situation ».
He started a magazine called Les Temps Modernes, which he hoped would help to drive social change.
It was formidably important, not only because of the number of people who contributed to it, and because Sartre was the director, though the woman who really got things together and read the articles was Simone de Beauvoir. But here was a review that was going to take everything into account: politics, the life of ordinary people, literature, music, but the accent was on commitment.
Sartre really was born out of 3 weeks. His fame was, really was made during 3 weeks of the month of September 1945, where he really appeared like the writer on the scene. He gave a conference called Existentialism is a Humanism. He published his novel, The Chemin de la Liberté, Roads to Freedom. He gave out the first issue of his monthly magazine, Les Temps Modernes. And then his play, Huis Clos, No Exit, had been, performed for many months then.
Sartre's newfound status as France's most prominent writer was held by his very accessible lifestyle in and around the cafes and bars of Saint-Germain-des-Prés. Here was a new kind of very public intellectual, who even seemed to write his books in between sipping cups of coffee and chatting to friends.
Au Flore, il y avait, elle existe toujours, une salle au premier étage. Maintenant, il y a des gens qui viennent là tranquillement. Mais enfin, ils viennent plutôt pour lire. Si vous veniez un matin à 10h, vous apercevez Sartre, Le Castor, Bost, Scipion, qui chacun était à une table et écrivait, grattait. De temps en temps parlaient entre eux, bien sûr. Mais c'était une salle d'études, comme une classe.
The people around them, they all lived in the same hotel. It was like living in family, near one to the other, and not having, not being in possession of things.
He owned nothing. no flat, no car. He even threw away all his books one day.
He was interviewed by people in cafes and so on. People would ask him, but what is existentialism? And he would say, existentialism? I do not know what that is. My philosophy is a philosophy of existence. And he comes from a very complicated German philosophy, which is phenomenology. But I'm not going to explain to you right now, he said. So one of the things is that, you know, the kind of people press started to pull some elements from his very thick and dense works into the popular press by giving, you know, bits here and bits there. So basically, they started to build a whole thing out of existentialism.